Good evening. I'm Marcus Holmes. And tonight we gather not just for a special edition of Love and Stuff, but for an observance of an important time in history. This is the closing of our 100th observance of Black history, a tradition that began a century ago where Carter G. Woodson called on a nation to recognize the history it tried to erase. For 100 years, we have lifted the stories, the struggle, the brilliance, and the power of our people. And tonight, we focus in on one of its ideals, the voice of the vote. The ballot is more than a piece of paper. It is memory. It is sacrifice. It is strategy. It is survival. Before we begin, I want you to do what this community always does. Like, comment, and share. Share this with someone who needs to know that our history is not behind us, but it is still unfolding. Tonight, we lift every voice and vote.
This is our God when we rest thee. Bless our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. Shadow beneath thy hand, may we forever stand. True to our
This next segment, done podcast style, includes a gallery of courage. 25 individuals, some well known, some rarely named, who made the vote possible. Hiram Revels, the first Black U.S. Senator. Blanche K. Bruce, proof that Reconstruction briefly opened the door. Robert Smalls, from enslavement to Congress. Josiah Walls, defending Black suffrage in Florida. Jonathan C. Gibbs, organizing political power in the South. Ida B. Wells, exposing terror used to silence the vote. Henry McNeil Turner, challenging disenfranchisement from the pulpit. Mary Church Terrell, linking Black women to political power. T. Thomas Fortune, fighting voter suppression through journalism. Bishop Alexander Walters, organizing national resistance to Jim Crow. W.E.B. Du Bois, demanding full citizenship and the ballot. William Monroe Trotter, confronting disenfranchisement head-on. Nannie Helen Burroughs, educating Black women to political leadership. A. Philip Randolph, turning labor into a voting force. Ella Baker, building grassroots democracy. Diane Nash, strategizing nonviolent political power. Septima Clark, teaching citizenship for voter registration. Marie Foster, preparing people to pass literacy test. Amelia Boynton Robinson, organizing Selma. Hosea Williams, leading marchers to the bridge. Vernon Dahmer, murdered for helping people vote. Albert Turner, continuing the Selma struggle. Fannie Lou Hamer, Is This America? And the Honorable John Lewis, who shed blood for the ballot. These are the architects of access. The vote did not appear. It was built.
So I have a question for you today that, sounds like it should be the absolute easiest trivia question in the world.
Oh boy. Okay.
Yeah. If I asked you, or if I asked you listening right now, when did African-American men guaranteed get the right to vote in the United States? What date pops into your head?
See, it's a total trick question.
It is absolutely a trick question because, if you're thinking, 1870, the 15th Amendment, you're technically right on paper,
Right.
but you're historically wrong in practice.
Yeah.
And if you say 1965, the Voting Rights Act, you're just entirely ignoring a whole century of history before it.
Exactly. And honestly, if you look at the source material we're covering today, you might argue the real answer is just, it's complicated.
It really is. We usually learn history as this straight line, right?
Yeah.
You have a problem, you get a solution, happily ever after.
Yeah, a neat little timeline.
Right. But jumping into this deep dive into the source material today, it's definitely not a straight line. It's a tug of war. It's essentially a century-long brawl over who actually gets to participate in democracy.
It really is the difference between a law just being written down in the Constitution and a law actually being lived out on the ground.
Yes.
And that gap, that massive canyon between the promise and the reality is exactly what we are going to unpack today.
Right, so today's deep dive is into a topic the materials call the long road to the ballot box. And we have this amazing stack of historical records we're looking at.
Yeah, it's a really comprehensive overview.
We've got legislation, court cases, and some really fascinating analysis of the Jim Crow era, all the way up to the Voting Rights Act of 1965.
And beyond, really.
Exactly. So our mission today, for you listening is to figure out how you can pass a constitutional amendment, which is, the highest law in the land, and then just ignore it for decades.
And it wasn't just ignored. The sources highlight the specific, almost surgical mechanisms that were engineered to bypass it.
Right.
It wasn't accidental at all. It was basically a masterclass in legal loopholes.
So let's start at the beginning, or I guess the false finish line, as the historical records frame it. The 15th Amendment.
Right. So we are in early 1870.
Passed by Congress in February 1869, and then ratified February 3, 1870.
Exactly. And the vibe at the time, at least among the radical Republicans and the former abolitionists, was basically mission accomplished.
They really thought they had fixed it.
They absolutely did. They viewed this as the fulfillment of all promises to African Americans.
Which makes sense if you look at the context.
Right, because this was the finale of a trilogy, the Reconstruction Amendments.
Right, the big three. You have the 13th Amendment first.
Which ended slavery. That is step one, freedom.
Then the 14th Amendment, which is huge. That guarantees citizenship.
Citizenship and equal protection. So you have freedom and you have citizenship.
Right.
But the argument in Congress at the time was, okay, you're free and you're a citizen, but how do you actually protect those things?
Without political power, right?
Exactly. Without the vote, you're incredibly vulnerable. So the 15th Amendment was meant to be the shield.
It explicitly gave voting rights to black males. It was supposed to be the lock on the door.
And for a minute, and this is crucial, it actually worked.
Yeah, the sources really emphasize this brief success. We tend to jump straight from the Civil War to Jim Crow.
We do. But there was this window in the 1880s where the system functioned.
I was actually so surprised by the data on this in the source material. In the 1880s, you had African American men voting in really significant numbers in many southern states. They were holding office.
It was a revolution, functionally. You had people who just a few years prior were legally considered property, now writing laws and sitting in state legislatures.
It must have been a massive shock to the status quo.
A total shock. The machinery of democracy was turning the way it was designed to.
But then we hit the pivot, the aha moment in the text.
Right.
Because if it was working in the 1880s, what broke in the 1890s?
Well, the success is exactly what triggered the rollback.
Right. It wasn't that the system failed, it's that it worked too well for the people who wanted to maintain white supremacy.
Precisely. If no one was voting, the white establishment in the South wouldn't have cared as much.
Yeah.
But because black men were voting and gaining real political influence, the shift in the early 1890s was a deliberate move to strip that political power away.
But here is the problem for them, legally speaking. The 15th Amendment is still right there in the Constitution.
It is.
So they can't just pass a state law that says, black people cannot vote.
No, the Supreme Court would have to toss that out immediately.
So they couldn't attack the who. They had to attack the how.
Exactly. This is the mechanics of disenfranchisement. The sources detail. They had to come up with race-neutral rules that just happened to eliminate black voters.
And the creativity here, if you can even call it that, is just terrifying.
It's totally insidious. Let's look at the literacy tests, which the records highlight.
Right.
On the surface, it sounds somewhat reasonable to a 19th century ear. We want voters who can read.
Sure, create a barrier for entry based on education. But then the text explains how they were actually applied.
Right, because the register had total discretion.
So a white voter comes in, and the test is something incredibly simple.
But an African American voter comes in, and the registrar gives them a wildly complex passage of obscure legal jargon.
And even if they got it right, the registrar could just fail them anyway.
Exactly. It was a subjective barrier. But the architects of these laws ran into a catch.
Which is that literacy tests were also going to hurt poor, illiterate white voters.
Right. And the Southern political machine absolutely needed those white votes to maintain power.
So they needed a loophole for their own loophole.
Enter the grandfather clause.
Yeah. The source highlights this specific detail, and it is arguably one of the most cynical legal devices in American history.
It really is. The law basically said, hey, if you can't pass the literacy test, don't worry. You can still vote if your ancestors had the right to vote in the 1860s.
Which is just wow, because you have to think about that date, the 1860s.
Right.
That is before the 15th Amendment.
Exactly. So if you were African American, your grandfather couldn't vote in the 1860s.
Because they were likely enslaved.
Right. So you don't get the exemption. You are forced to take the impossible literacy test.
But if you're a white voter who can't read at all, your grandfather could vote in the 1860s, so you are totally exempt.
It targeted African Americans with absolute precision while technically never mentioning race.
And this all gets a legal seal of approval, sadly, in 1896.
Yes. Plessy v. Ferguson.
We usually talk about this case in terms of train cars or schools, the whole separate but equal doctrine.
Right, but the source notes it legitimized social and economic segregation right alongside this massive political loss of power.
They went hand in hand.
They did. Once the Supreme Court established separate but equal, it basically validated the entire Jim Crow system.
And the consequence of this rollback is staggering. The records describe it as resulting in more than 50 years of second-class citizenship.
Over half a century.
That's the part that really hits you. 50 years isn't a brief pause.
No.
That's multiple generations of people living, paying taxes, and dying without a real voice in their government.
It's a massive span of time. But the sources are also very clear that despite this dark period, the resistance never stopped.
Right, it wasn't just 50 years of passive acceptance.
Not at all. The fight continued. This era serves as the crucial bridge between the post-Civil War period and the Civil Rights era.
The records highlight some key players here who were organizing for change when it was incredibly dangerous to do so.
Yes. You have organizations like the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP, and the National Urban League.
And individual reformers too, right?
Yeah.
The text mentions Booker T. Washington
And W.E.B. Du Bois.
and A. Philip Randolph.
Right. These leaders and organizations were doing the long, grinding work of securing rights.
They were building the foundation.
Exactly. So by the time we fast forward to 1965, the pressure has been building for decades.
1965 is a major turning point in our deep dive today.
It is. The source cites reports of continuing discriminatory voting practices as the ultimate catalyst for federal intervention.
Basically, the evidence of systemic suppression became impossible for the federal government to ignore anymore.
Right, which brings President Lyndon B. Johnson into the picture.
And the text makes a point to note a specific detail about LBJ, which is that he was himself a Southerner.
Yes, he knew the Southern political system intimately.
So when he takes action on March 15, 1965, urging Congress to pass new legislation, it carries a lot of weight.
It was a monumental shift. He was taking a direct stand against the practices of his own region.
And the quotes from LBJ in the source material are incredibly direct.
They really are.
He stated that the goal was to, quote, make it impossible to thwart the 15th Amendment.
He was directly referencing that original promise from 1870.
And he also laid out the philosophy behind it. He said, quote, we cannot have government for all the people until we first make certain it is government of and by all the people.
Of and by.
Right.
If a whole segment of the population can't participate, the government itself lacks legitimacy.
So the solution Congress comes up with is the Voting Rights Act of 1965.
Yes. And this act was designed to be the enforcement mechanism the 15th Amendment had been missing for 95 years.
It abolished the remaining deterrents we talked about, like the literacy tests.
Just wiped them out completely.
But the real teeth of the law, according to the records, was that it authorized federal supervision of voter registration where it was necessary.
That is the crucial part. The federal government stepped in to oversee the rules in areas with a history of discrimination.
The states couldn't just invent a new loophole without the federal government reviewing it first.
Exactly. And this federal supervision was so effective and deemed so necessary that the act was extended multiple times.
The text mentions extensions in 1970, 1975, and 1982.
Right. It became a permanent fixture of American democracy for decades.
So hearing all that, the story seems resolved. Problem, long struggle, federal solution.
It does feel like a natural conclusion.
But history doesn't just stop. Which brings us to the modern context, and specifically the year 2013.
Right. This is the twist in the narrative.
In 2013, we have a major Supreme Court decision that shifts the landscape all over again.
Yes. The court struck down a key provision of the Voting Rights Act.
And this provision directly involved that federal supervision we just talked about.
Exactly. It specifically impacted the federal oversight of voting rules in 9 states.
9 states that previously had to get permission to change their voting laws suddenly didn't have to anymore.
Right. The court basically ruled that the formula used to decide which states needed oversight was outdated.
So the requirement for federal supervision in those specific areas was removed.
Which connects us right back to the very beginning of this deep dive.
Back to the 15th Amendment.
Exactly. It shows that the fundamental struggle over who oversees voting rights and how those rights are actually enforced is still highly active today in the 21st century.
It's an ongoing tug of war. So to recap this incredible journey we've taken through the source material.
It's a lot of ground to cover.
It really is. We started with the ratification of the 15th Amendment in 1870, which promised the vote.
Then we saw the massive rollback in the 1890s through Jim Crow, using literacy tests and grandfather clauses to legally bypass the amendment.
Then decades of organized resistance leading to the massive federal enforcement of the Voting Rights Act in 1965.
And finally, the 2013 court decision that removed a huge piece of that federal oversight.
So it brings up the big so what for you listening. Why does this specific history matter today?
Well, the historical records clearly prove that a right written on a piece of paper, even the Constitution, requires constant maintenance.
Maintenance, yeah.
It requires enforcement and absolute vigilance to actually exist in reality. The 15th Amendment was just one step.
In fact, there is a quote in the source material that perfectly captures this. It describes the 15th Amendment as a struggle for equality that would continue for more than a century.
Struggle for more than a century.
So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought based on everything we've unpacked today. With that 2013 Supreme Court ruling fundamentally changing the rules of federal oversight yet again, are we looking at the end of that century-long struggle for equality? Or are we just looking at the start of a brand new chapter in the exact same book? Something to mull over as you watch the news today. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the long road to the ballot box. We will catch you next time.
Well, children, where there is so much racket, there must be something out of kilter. I think that twixt the Negroes of the South and the women at the North all talking about rights, the white man gonna be in a fix pretty soon. But what's all this here talking about? That man over there says that women need to be helped into carriages and lifted over ditches and to have the best place everywhere. Nobody ever helps me into carriages or over mud puddles or gives me any best place. And ain't I a woman? Look at me. Look at my arm. I have plowed and planted and gathered into barns, and no man could head me. And ain't I a woman? I could work as much and eat as much as any man when I could get it. And I could bear the lash as well. And ain't I a woman? I have borne 13 children, seen most sold off into slavery. And when I cried out with a mother's grief, none but Jesus heard me. And ain't I a woman? And they talk about this thing in the head. What is it they call it? Oh, that's right, yeah, intellect. That's it, honey. Well, what's that got to do with women's rights and Negroes' rights? If my cup won't hold but a pint and yours holds a quart, wouldn't you be mean not to let me have my little half measure full? That man in the back there, he says women can't have as much rights as men because Christ wasn't a woman. Well, where did your Christ come from? Where did your Christ come from? He came from God and a woman. Man didn't have nothing to do with it. If the first woman God ever made was strong enough to turn the world upside down all alone, well, these women here together ought to be able to turn it back and get it right side up again. And they asking to do it. The men better let them.
During the 1920s, black Pullman porters sought better wages and working conditions on traveling sleeper train cars. One of America's earliest civil rights leaders, A. Philip Randolph, was asked to help. To that end, he founded the first African-American labor union in the United States, the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, in 1925. Almost 40 years later, Randolph became the organizing force behind the most famous civil rights march in American history. Some called him the true father of the civil rights movement in the United States. This is the historical marker for Asa Philip Randolph, who was an early civil rights leader. His marker is located here in Crescent City, Florida, in front of the church where his father was minister. Over his career, Randolph worked with presidents and civil rights leaders to push for desegregation and civil rights with his method of nonviolent confrontation. Now let's learn more about his incredible story behind the marker. After the Civil War, one job available for recently freed slaves was working on trains. In an era of significant racial prejudice, being a Pullman porter was one of the best jobs available for African American men. Pullman's luxury cars were famous for the impeccable service and royal treatment provided by the staff. Company founder George Pullman hired African American freemen who were previously slaves in the South as porters for his luxury cars. These porters were trained to be valets and waiters and were paid relatively well and got to travel all over the U.S., which gained them a position of respect in the black community. Pullman porters have been widely credited with contributing to the development of the black middle class in America. By World War I, 12,000 porters were employed by the Pullman Company. George Pullman became the biggest single employer of African Americans in post-Civil War America. Working for the Pullman Company was, however, less glamorous than the image the company promoted. Black porters depended on tips for much of their income, which meant on the generosity of white passengers who often called them all the same, George, the first name of Mr. Pullman. Pullman demanded 400 working hours a month or 11,000 miles, sometimes as much as 20 hours at a stretch to earn a basic wage. On August 25, 1925, 500 porters met in Harlem to organize a new labor union. They approached the young and well-spoken publicist and newspaper editor of The Messenger, A. Philip Randolph, and asked him to help. Randolph agreed. Besides his standing as a labor organizer and civil rights activist, Randolph was not a Pullman Company employee, meaning the company could not fire him or buy him off. That year, Randolph organized and led the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, the first successful African-American labor union. Their demands included a living wage instead of tipping, a 240-hour work month, and 4 to 6 hours of rest each night. During the following years, Randolph became the most widely known spokesperson for black working-class interest in the country, and three U.S. presidents got to learn firsthand about Randolph's persuasive tactics to create social change. In January 1941, Randolph lobbied President Franklin Roosevelt to issue an executive order abolishing discrimination in national defense jobs and ending Jim Crow laws in the military. Roosevelt was not persuaded, so Randolph came up with a novel idea. He organized the formation of the March on Washington movement, calling for 10,000 blacks to hold a rally on July 1st at the Lincoln Memorial. Randolph's proposal was a radical shift away from the strategies of leading civil rights groups at the time. By early summer, Randolph announced the number of expected participants had risen to 100,000. You can imagine that Roosevelt was desperate to avoid the march.
I called for a conference with the president. He said, Phil Randolph, we can't have 100,000 Negroes marching on Washington. If anything such as that were to occur, you wouldn't be able to manage them. We might have bloodshed and death. He said, now let us get on to business here and find out what can be done.
With only 7 days to spare, Randolph called off the march. In exchange, Roosevelt issued Executive Order 8802, prohibiting discrimination of employment in defense industries and establishing a Fair Employment Practices Committee. 2 million blacks eventually found employment in wartime defense work.
Negroes want the same things that white citizens possess.
7 years later, Randolph used the March on Washington movement to pressure another president, Harry Truman, to end Jim Crow laws in the military and to integrate the armed forces. Threatened with widespread racial tensions and needing the black vote in his 1948 re-election campaign, President Harry Truman signed Executive Order 9981 on July 26, 1948, banning racial segregation in the armed forces. In the 1960s, it was President Kennedy's turn to experience A. Philip Randolph. Randolph finally realized his vision for a march on Washington for jobs and freedom on August 28, 1963, which attracted between 200 and 300,000 people to the nation's capital. Although Kennedy had been pushing Congress for a new Civil Rights Act since early 1963, he initially did not support the event because of concern about the potential impact of the march on his pending civil rights legislation.
We believe that it's
The rally is often remembered as the high point of the civil rights movement.
all over the world. Let the nation and the world know the meaning of our numbers. We are not a pressure group. We are not a mob. We are the advance guard of a massive moral revolution for jobs and freedom.
Later, Randolph introduces the moral leader of the march, Dr. Martin Luther King.
I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
After the successful conclusion of the march, President Kennedy invited civil rights leaders to the White House, where they discussed the need for bipartisan support of civil rights legislation. After the Kennedy assassination on November 22, 1963, the bill was left in the hands of Lyndon B. Johnson. On July the 2nd, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 became law. The Civil Rights Act was a crucial step in achieving the civil rights movement's initial goal of full legal equality. 3 months later, on September 14, 1964, A. Philip Randolph was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President Lyndon Johnson. This award is the highest civilian honor given by the U.S. executive branch. Due to his failing health, Randolph resigned his presidency of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters and retired from public life in 1968. Asa Philip Randolph died in his Manhattan apartment on May 16, 1979, at age 90. Today, you can visit the National A. Philip Randolph Pullman Porter Museum in Chicago, Illinois, to celebrate his legacy. Many will say that A. Philip Randolph was the true father of the civil rights movement in the United States. He felt that civil disobedience, nonviolent protest, and mass demonstrations were the very best way to mobilize public pressure and create the social change that everyone deserves.
The seating of the delegation from the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party has political and moral significance far beyond the borders of Mississippi or the halls of this convention.
It is the very terror that these people are living through that is the reason that Negroes aren't voting, that they're kept out of the Democratic Party by the terror of the regular party. And what I want the Credentials Committee to hear is the terror which the regular party uses on the people of Mississippi, which is what Reverend King was explaining, which is what Aaron Henry was explaining, and which is what the next witness will explain, Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer.
Mr. Chairman, and to the Credentials Committee, my name is Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer, and I live at 626 East Lafayette Street, Rooseville, Mississippi. Sunflower County, the home of Senator James O. Eastland and Senator Steny. All of this is on account of we want to register to become first-class citizens. And if the Freedom Democratic Party is not seated now, I question America. Is this America, the land of the free and the home of the brave, where we have to sleep with our telephones off of the hook because our lives be threatened daily, because we want to live as decent human beings in America? Thank you. It was the 31st of August in 1962 that 18 of us traveled 26 miles to the county courthouse in Indianola to try to register to become first-class citizens. We was met in Indianola by policemen, highway patrolmen, and they only allowed 2 of us in to take the literacy test at the time. After we had taken this test and started back to Roosevelt, we was held up by the city police and the state highway patrolmen and carried back to Indianola, where the bus driver was charged that day with driving a bus the wrong color. After we paid the fine among us, we continued on to Roosevelt, and Reverend Jeff Sonny carried me 4 miles in the rural area where I had worked as a timekeeper and sharecropper for 18 years. I was met there by my children that told me the plantation owner was angry because I had gone down, tried to register. After they told me, my husband came and said the plantation owner was raising Cain because I had tried to register. And before he quit talking, the plantation owner came and said, Fannie Lou, do you know, did Pap tell you what I said? And I said, yes, sir. He said, well, I mean that if you don't go down and withdraw your registration, you will have to leave. Said then if you go down and withdraw, that you still might have to go because we are not ready for that in Mississippi. And I addressed him and told him, that I didn't try to register for you. I tried to register for myself. I had to leave that same night. All of this is on account of we want to register to become first-class citizens.
The sharecropper who had been evicted from her plantation had come to symbolize the Mississippi movement.
He's not afraid of Martin Luther King's testimony. He's afraid of Fannie Lou Hamer's testimony. And so he decides that the country should not see her testify live.
Johnson is in the White House, and he convened an impromptu press conference.
We will return to this scene in Atlantic City, but now we switch to the White House and NBC's Robert Goralski.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
On this day, 9 months ago.
He did it knowing that they would break away, thinking he might announce who his choice of vice president was going to be. Instead, he gets up there and he announces, get this, he announces that it's 9 months to the day since Governor Connolly, who was there, was shot along with President Kennedy. So he announced a 9-month anniversary. Everybody's scratching their heads.
Thank you very much.
And then he leaves. And by that time, Fannie Lou Hamer's testimony was over. However, it backfired on Johnson because it became a story that she had been taken off television, and in the news that night and for days afterwards, they replayed her testimony.
I was carried to the county jail and put in the booking room. They left some of the people in the booking room and began to place us in cells.
She had Mississippi in her bones. Martin Luther King or the SNCC field secretaries, they couldn't do what Fannie Lou Hamer did. They couldn't be a sharecropper and express what it meant, right? And that's what Fannie Lou Hamer did.
And it wasn't too long before 3 white men came to my cell. One of these men was a state highway patrol. He said, "We're going to make you wish you was dead."
The date was March 7th, 1965. Bloody Sunday was the first of 3 attempted marches from Selma to Montgomery, which was finally completed under federal protection and led by Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. One of the protesters beaten on Bloody Sunday was Congressman John Lewis, then a 25-year-old organizer with SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee.
I was beaten by state troopers, knocked to the ground, and I was in the hospital confined until about an hour ago.
On March 7, 1965, a group of us attempted to march from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama, to dramatize to the nation that people wanted to register to vote. One young African-American man had been shot and killed a few days earlier in an adjoining county called Perry County. This is in the Black Belt of Alabama, the home county of Mrs. Martin Luther King Jr., the home county of Mrs. Ralph Abernathy, the home county of Mrs. Andrew Young. And because of what happened to him, we made a decision to march. In Selma, Alabama in 1965, only 2.1% of blacks of voting age were registered to vote. The only place you could attempt to register was to go down to the courthouse. You had to pass a so-called literacy test. And they were told people over and over again that they couldn't pass the literacy test. On one occasion, a man was asked to count the number of bubbles in a bar of soap. On another occasion, a man was asked to count the number of jelly beans in a jar. There were African-American lawyers, doctors, teachers, housewives, college professors, flunking the so-called literacy test. And we had to change that. So we sought to march. And we got to the top of the bridge. We saw a sea of blue, Alabama state troopers. And we continued to walk. We came within hearing distance of the state troopers. And a man identified himself and said, "I'm Major John Cloud of the Alabama state troopers. This is an unlawful march. You will not be allowed to continue. I give you 3 minutes to disperse and return to your church." And one of the young people walking with me, leading the march, a man by the name of Jose Williams, who was on the staff of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., said, "Major, give us a moment to kneel and pray." And the major said, "Troopers, advance." And you saw these guys putting on their gas masks. They came toward us, beating us with nightsticks and bullwhips, trampling us with horses. I was hit in the head by a state trooper with a nightstick. I had a concussion at the bridge. My legs went out from under me. I felt like I was going to die. I thought I saw death. All these many years later, I don't recall how I made it back across the bridge to the church. But as I got back to the church is full to capacity. More than 2,000 people outside trying to get in to protest what had happened on the bridge. And someone asked me to say something to the audience. And I stood up and said something like, "I don't understand it. How President Johnson can send troops to Vietnam, but cannot send troops to Selma, Alabama to protect people who only desires to register to vote." The next thing I knew, I'd been admitted to a local hospital in Selma.
Explain that moment where you decided to move forward, because I don't think the history we learn records those small acts that are actually gargantuan acts of bravery. Talk about, I mean, you saw the weapons the police arrayed against you. What propelled you forward, Congressmember Lewis?
Well, my mother, my father, my grandparents, my uncles and aunts, and people all around me had never registered to vote. I've been working all across the South. The state of Mississippi had a black voting age population of more than 450,000, and only about 16,000 were registered to vote. On that day, we didn't have a choice. I think we had been tracked down by what I call the spirit of history, and we couldn't turn back. We had to go forward. We became like trees planted by the rivers of water. We were anchored And I thought we would die. I first thought we would be arrested and go to jail, but I thought it was a real possibility that some of us would down that bridge that day after the confrontation occurred. I thought it was the last protest for me, but somehow, in some way, you have to keep going. You go to a hospital, you go to a doctor's office, you get mended, and you get up and try it again.
So what was the next act you engaged in?
Well, we continued to organize, continued to try to get people registered. We went to federal court and testified to get an injunction against Governor George Wallace and Alabama state troopers. And the federal court said that we had a right to mourn from Selma to Montgomery. President Johnson spoke to the nation and condemned the violence in Selma, introduced the Voting Rights Act, and that night he made one of the most meaningful speeches that any American president had made in modern time on the whole question of civil rights and voting rights. He condemned the violence over and over again. And near the end of the speech, he said, "And we shall overcome. We shall overcome." We call it the "We Shall Overcome" speech. I was sitting next to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. as we listened to President Johnson. I looked at Dr. King. Tears came down his face. He started crying. And we all cried a little. But we heard the president saying, "We shall overcome." And Dr. King said, "We will make it from Selma to Montgomery, and the Voting Rights Act will be passed." 2 weeks later, more than 10,000 of us, people from all over America, started walking from Selma to Montgomery. And by the time we made it to Montgomery 5 days later, there were almost 30,000 black and white citizens, Protestant, Catholic, Jewish, men, women, young people. It was like a holy march. And the Congress debated the act, passed it, and on August 6, 1965, President Lyndon Johnson signed it into law.
Keep your hand on that plow. Hold on, hold on, hold on. Noah, Noah, let me come in. Doors are fastened and the windows pin. Keep your hand on that plow and hold on. Hold on.
Noah said you done lost your track. Can't plow straight and keep looking back. Keep your hand on that plow and hold on. Hold on. Hold on. Keep your hand on the plow and hold on.
Hold on. Hold on.
President's address to a joint session of Congress on voting legislation. From the House Chamber of the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C., March 15, 1965.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. President, members of the Congress, I speak tonight for the dignity of man and the destiny of democracy. I urge every member of both parties, Americans of all religions and of all colors, from every section of this country, to join me in that cause. At times, history and fate meet at a single time, in a single place, to shape a turning point in man's unending search for freedom. So it was at Lexington and Concord. So it was a century ago at Appomattox. So it was last week in Selma, Alabama. There, long-suffering men and women peacefully protested the denial of their rights as Americans. Many were brutally assaulted. One good man, a man of God, was killed. There is no cause for pride in what has happened in Selma. There is no cause for self-satisfaction in the long denial of equal rights of millions of Americans. But there is cause for hope and for faith in our democracy and what is happening here tonight. For the cries of pain and the hymns and protests of oppressed people have summoned into convocation all the majesty of this great government, the government of the greatest nation on earth. Our mission is at once the oldest and the most basic of this country: to right wrong, to do justice, to serve man. In our time, we have come to live with the moments of great crisis. Our lives have been marked with debate about great issues, issues of war and peace, issues of prosperity and depression. But rarely in any time does an issue lay bare the secret heart of America itself. Rarely are we met with a challenge not to our growth or abundance, or our welfare or our security, but rather to the values and the purposes and the meaning of our beloved nation. The issue of equal rights for American Negroes is such an issue. And should we defeat every enemy, and should we double our wealth and conquer the stars and still be unequal to this issue, then we will have failed as a people and as a nation. For with a country as with a person, what is a man profited if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul? There is no Negro problem. There is no Southern problem. There is no Northern problem. There is only an American problem.
Friends, brothers, and sisters in the struggle for human dignity and freedom, I am here to represent the struggle that has gone on for 300 or more years, a struggle to be recognized as citizens in a country in which we were born. I have had about 40 or 50 years of struggle, ever since a little boy on the streets of Norfolk called me a nigger. I struck him back. I had to learn that hitting back with my fist one individual was not enough. It takes organization. It takes dedication. It takes the willingness to stand by and do what has to be done when it has to be done. A nice gathering like today is not enough. You have to go back and reach out to your neighbors who don't speak to you. And you have to reach out to your friends who think they are making it good and get them to understand that they, as well as you and I, cannot be free in America or anywhere else where there is capitalism and imperialism until we can get people to recognize that they themselves have to make the struggle and have to make the fight for freedom every day in the year, every year, until they win it. Thank you.
And she was facilitating people coming together and knowing that they could run their society, if it was just Podunk or a little town or the state or eventually the country, right? But you got to do it first where you are. And I think she knew that.
You have this long, long walk, and you learn how to do it. And as I think about her walk, there are three ways that I think it was ways for us to look at it. One was that there's a way to live in this country in struggle. The second was that the struggle should be radical in her sense that you go to the root of something. And in that way, we're thinking about the people that we struggle with. And so Ella taught us to struggle with the people at the bottom. And then the third way was her sense, which Jackie here reminds us of, her sense of family. That in this walk, that you don't sacrifice family. So those are the three legacies for me, that you are in struggle and you're consciously in struggle, and you can carve out a life in this country in struggle. Your struggle should be radical. It should go to the root of some problem. And it should work with the people who are at the bottom. And you should carve out, as you go, your family.
I think that when you talk about Ella Baker, you're indeed talking about someone who was truly a giant of the 20th century. This is a person who defined that century. And I think that when we talk about her in terms of civil rights, we're really limiting her. She was a true 20th century champion of human justice and human rights. She ranked there with Du Bois and with everybody else. And SNCC and the MFDP were, in a way, the last of her legacies.
Tonight we close paying tribute to a man who carried the movement from the streets into the political arena, the late Reverend Jesse Louis Jackson. Organizer, minister, strategist, presidential candidate. He transformed protest into participation. Through the Rainbow Push Coalition, he brought together Black voters, poor voters, young voters, and those who had never believed their vote could matter. His campaigns registered millions. His message was clear. If you are registered, you are powerful. If you vote, you are heard. Tonight, we honor him in memoriam, not only for the offices he sought, but for the electorate he expanded. We will close with two moments. First, from one of his speeches during the Democratic nomination in his fight that changed American politics, and second, from his address to the Oxford students, where he reminded the world that hope is not a slogan, it is a discipline. Reverend Jesse Jackson kept hope alive, and he kept us voting. May he rest in eternal peace.
Jesse Jackson, you don't understand my situation. You'll be on television. You don't understand. I see you with the big people. You don't understand my situation. I understand. You see me on TV, but you don't know the me that makes me me. They wonder why does Jesse run? Because they see me running for the White House. They don't see the house I'm running from. I have a story. I wasn't always on television. Writers were not always outside my door. When I was born late one afternoon, October 8th, in Greenville, South Carolina, no writers asked my mother her name. Nobody chose to write down our address. A mama was not supposed to make it, and I was not supposed to make it. You see, I was born to a teenage mother who was born to a teenage mother. I understand. I know abandonment and people being mean to you and saying you're nothing and nobody and can never be anything. I understand. Jesse Jackson is my third name. I'm adopted. When I had no name, my grandmother gave me her name. My name was Jesse Burns till I was 12. So I wouldn't have a blank space. She gave me a name to hold me over. I understand when nobody knows your name. I understand when you have no name. I understand. I wasn't born in the hospital. Mama didn't have insurance. I was born in the bed at house. I really do understand. Born in a 3-room house, bathroom in the backyard, slop job by the bed, no hot and cold running water. I understand. Wallpaper used for decoration? No, for a windbreaker. I understand. I'm a working person's person. That's why I understand you, whether you're black or white. I understand work. I was not born with a silver spoon in my mouth. I had a shovel programmed for my hand. My mother, a working woman. So many days she went to work early, with runs in her stockings. She knew better, but she rolled runs in her stockings so that my brother and I could have matching socks and not be laughed at school. I understand. At 3 o'clock on Thanksgiving Day, we couldn't eat turkey because Mama was preparing somebody else's turkey at 3 o'clock. We had to play football to entertain ourselves. And then around 6 o'clock, she would get off the Alta Vista bus, and we would bring up the leftovers and eat our turkey, leftovers, the caucus, the cranberries, around 8 o'clock at night. I really do understand. Every one of these funny labels they put on you, those of you who are watching this broadcast tonight in the projects, on the corners, I understand. Call you outcast, low down, you can't make it, you're nothing, you're from nobody, subclass, underclass. When you see Jesse Jackson, when my name goes in nomination, your name goes in nomination. I was born in the slum, but the slum was not born in me. And it wasn't born in you, and you can make it. Wherever you are tonight, you can make it. Hold your head high. Stick your chest out. You can make it. It gets dark sometimes, but the morning comes. Don't you surrender. Suffering breeds character. Character breeds faith. In the end, faith will not disappoint. You must not surrender. You may or may not get there, but just know that you're qualified, and you hold on and hold out. We must never surrender. America will get better and better. Keep hope alive. Keep hope alive. Keep hope alive. On tomorrow night and beyond. Keep hope alive. I love you very much. I love you very much.
1965 in America, we asked the government to intervene. They had to intervene to end slavery, and then intervene to end Jim Crow apartheid laws. We intervened for the right to vote. Blacks old enough to vote, veterans of world wars, patriotic enough to vote. Some with PhDs could not pass the exams, literate enough to vote, but could not vote. But once that was intervention and we could vote, women got the right to serve on juries in 1967. There were no women on the Supreme Court. 18-year-olds got the right to vote in 1970. Those serving in Vietnam, they could not vote. We got the right to vote on college campuses in 1974. Bilingual voting in 1975. A nation of many languages, but one message. The great dream being you are welcome here if you yearn to breathe free, but you could not breathe free because you did not have the basic rights of protection. So laws changed, and behavior changed, and attitudes are changing. But the impact of the devastating foreclosure crisis, the impact of globalizing the job market, more billionaires up top, more middle class sinking, more poverty base expanding. Now the vote is being suppressed. And for our youth, we choose rather than invest in prenatal care, Head Start and daycare on the front side, we have jail care and welfare on the back side. What does this say to you and for your future? There are 21 schools in Oxbridge with no blacks. One school without a black in 5 years. Does that say that your intelligence is supreme? And those locked out have less intelligence? Is that the natural order endowed by God? Or is that the social order endowed by manipulation? If it's social, it can be fixed without divine intervention. If segregation by any other name. It hurts the segregator and the segregated. If you plant two seeds in the ground of equal strength and water the both of them and put a wall in between, one will grow tall, multiple fruits, strong stems, branches, and one will be stunted, not grow and be barren. The barren one is not a lesser one, nor the fruitful one a superior one. It's something called photosynthesis. The one that gets the sunlight grows. The one in the shadows is stunted or dwarfed. When the walls come down and the sun can shine on both seeds, there are multiple, and everybody wins. The inclusion leads to growth, and as growth, everybody wins. Someone assumes that the in group and all the A's in the classroom makes you more fit and smarter in the world, or to be a world leader. It does not represent brain distribution. It is in your interest in this world to have classmates to look somewhat like the world. Half of all human beings in the world tonight are Asian. Half of them are Chinese, and they were not discovered by Nixon. 1/8 of the human race is African, 1/4 Nigerian. In America, South, Central, Latin America, it's 2/3 of our population. English is a minority language in our hemisphere. It becomes our challenge in this world where most people are yellow, brown, black, non-Christian, thirsty. Most people in this world tonight are yellow, brown, black, non-Christian, poor, female, young, and don't speak English. In that world, to make all A's and a slither of the world is not enough to be a leader. In that world, you must see the world through a door, not through a keyhole. In that world of an endowed Africa, of an expanding Asia, in that world, you must have classmates, roommates, and friends, many languages with one message to share and grow and build together.